Hello everyone, welcome again to one of our business conversation series. I'm delighted that we're going to be talking about all things professional services, and particularly today we're going to focus again on the legal industry. I'm joined by Simon Tupman here, who's one of the foremost thinkers about how you do leadership in the legal industry, and he's kind enough to give me a copy of his awesome book, The Heart of a Practice, which really gets into how you actually understand leadership and build it in a law firm. So I'm really looking forward to my chat with Simon today. But before we get stuck into the book and all the things in that, Simon, tell me a little bit about yourself and what led you into doing consulting in the world of law.
Right, well, it goes back a long time. It's very nice to join you. Thank you for having me. It goes back to the 80s, in fact, when I qualified as a solicitor in England. And I found myself doing criminal defence work, legally aided work. After 3 or 4 years, I decided I didn't enjoy it. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, so I went back to business school and spent a year there before sort of sidetracking my career into consulting with an advertising agency, and then a trip to New Zealand led to a job here as a marketing manager with a fairly substantial law firm. And that was a stepping stone into my consulting career, and so I've been consulting to law firms and legal professionals around the world for the last 30 odd years now.
Awesome, so nice in-depth experience.
A lot, yes, of an experience of law firms of all sizes, but predominantly my work is with the small to mid-tier range. Yeah.
So moving into the book, The Heart of a Practice, Simon, you discuss a couple of things, and there's 4 key themes that come across in that book, but I would love you to talk us through what those 4 themes are, but also who they apply to. You talk a lot about law firm leaders, but the second part of that question is, who are those law firm leaders? Are they just partners, or is it something completely different?
Well, it's a huge topic, leadership, and as I was putting this book together, one of the challenges was to determine what I was going to leave out, if you like, because there are, as you know, thousands and thousands of books in print on the topic of leadership. And as far as how that might apply in legal circles, as it were, I think there are obviously some very special circumstances, and my goal was really to try and distill and break down various aspects of leadership as it may apply to a law firm. And so in the book I really broke it down into 4 areas. That's self-leadership, people leadership, business leadership, and community leadership. And in each of those 4 areas, I'm suggesting there is a principle that should guide law firms. So when it comes to self-leadership, I'm basically suggesting that you first learn to lead yourself before you lead others. Secondly, as far as people leadership is concerned, I'm suggesting that you treat people as you would like to be treated. When it comes to business leadership, I'm encouraging law firm leaders to run their firms as a business entity.
A true business entity.
A true business entity, that's a biggie. And the 4th area, community leadership, I'm encouraging leaders to help solve some of the world's problems. So those are the 4 principles and the 4 areas that I've sort of broken down in the book. In terms of the second part of your question, who that applies to, It's not just written for lawyers, this book. It's written for, as I call them, legal professionals. And by legal professionals, I include not only lawyers, senior lawyers, partners, but I also include the growing group of executives who are playing their part in making sure the operational side of the law firm is effective. So CEOs, anyone in the C-suite, practice managers, general managers, as far as I'm concerned, they all have a vital role to play in all of this, and they are leaders.
And so bring them together more as a kind of community of business leaders within that law firm rather than separate entities.
Absolutely. I think it needs to be integrated, but it does require, in some instances, I think, a mindset change, because the partnership model has been so used to having that separation. You're a lawyer or you're a non-lawyer, and I hate that description. And what I'm witnessing with forward-thinking law firms is that they do view their firm as a business entity in which their people are integrated.
Brilliant. Much better model.
I think so.
Look, the last few years, unsurprisingly, in all our series of conversations, regardless of where people in professional service come up, COVID, lockdowns, recessions, floods. It feels like famines as well going on at the moment. There's a lot going on. And you touch upon that in the book, but you also talk about, over the last few years, a call out in behavioural issues within the legal industry, and we're all fully aware of what those are. I don't want to go into detail what they are, but what does this mean for law firm leaders? How do they have to adapt and how do they have to change?
Well, I think the forces that you've referred to have affected all businesses. Obviously the COVID and climate change and all the rest of it. And so like any other business, law firms have to adjust their sails and deal with it. In terms of behavioural issues, I think these are well documented, they're recognised, and we know that they're being addressed by both internally and also by regulatory bodies as well. But I think it paints a picture historically of law firms whose partners have often assumed that by virtue of the fact that they are in a position of power, they can do what the hell they like. And I think the time has come where they realise that they actually can't do what they like, that if they are in a position of authority and they are leaders and owners of a business, that they have a responsibility to exhibit behaviours that are basically consistent with those that are expected of a leader, setting a good example. And I think these days, people who are in positions of authority in firms realise that there is really no room at the table for people who are going to behave badly.
And so the good news is the tide is turning in how this is.
Well, I think so. I mean, human nature is human nature. There will always be episodes, incidents, and it's not just prevalent in the legal services industry. But I think the fact that we're having this conversation and that the profession has actually had the conversation the last few years, and there's been an independent review conducted, means that people are far more sensitised to this issue than they were, say, 5 years ago.
Absolutely. So one of the things I really liked in self-leadership here was your kind of 4 pillars of how you do that self-leadership. So I'll allow you to describe that, and then not just describe what they are, but how this actually leaders put this into practice and what it means for them.
Okay. Well, I mean, the 4 pillars that I referred to are really an adaptation of the Ikigai principle. It's about really finding your sweet spot in life. Those 4 principles that I referred to were purpose, passion, professionalism, and personality. And what I'm suggesting is that it's our quest in life to find our sweet spot. In other words, doing work that's meaningful, that we like, for people that we like, and work that enables us to use our skills and to show our personalities. And it's my experience that that is a place that a lot of people spend years trying to find. You can apply yourself and become a specialist in a particular area, a particular field. You kind of then like the work, but then there may be other aspects to working in the firm that you don't like.
Yes.
It might be you don't like the firm, or you don't like the people around you, or you feel constrained because of certain policies that are not just consistent with how you want to work. So I think part of that is a challenge, I think, for all professionals, is to gravitate towards that sweet spot. I mean, if I can provide the context for this, I mentioned a few moments ago how I'd started off in my career representing basically people I didn't like. So I was doing work that wasn't particularly meaningful, representing people who in all probability were guilty, trying to get them off, or at least get them a reduced sentence. It paid badly, and it was very constraining because obviously I had to adhere to the rules of the court and all the rest of it. Yeah. So I realised at a relatively young age that I was a long way off my sweet spot, and I think that's a professional challenge for all of us. But I think as you gravitate towards that area, I think that the challenge is for everyone to get to know who they are. That's very much, I think, what self-leadership is about. It's about self-awareness. And that can take time, and I think it's sometimes a function of maturity and age and experience, and a combination of all those 3. And as I was researching this book, I read a book by David Brooks called The Second Mountain, in which he talked about how professionals go through essentially 2 phases in life. The first phase is very much about acquisition. About earning money, paying off the mortgage, acquiring a client base, status, getting runs on the board, all that sort of stuff, which we all do in our mid-20s to mid-30s.
Absolutely.
Then we get to our late 30s and we start asking questions about why am I doing this, or why am I doing it this way? And Brooks in his book talks about how we reach a second stage in our adult life where it's not so much about acquisition, but it's about contribution. We reach that secure spot where maybe we've achieved what we thought represented success, and we get to the top of the first mountain, we say, well, is that it?
Yep.
Or is there more? We might have made the money, we might have got a reputation for being good lawyers or good professionals in our field, but yet there's something eating away that's still missing from that sweet spot. And I believe that when that mindset shifts and you start scaling the second mountain, you start focusing on other people, not just yourself, that's when you tend to, I think, gravitate more towards doing work that is meaningful and fulfills you and gives you that satisfaction.
So that's a really important part, isn't it? Having that self-meaning, that why, that reason to get out of bed beyond just doing the work that's in front of you.
Very much so, and I don't think you can lead a good life unless you're doing things that do get you out of bed in the morning. But secondly, when it comes to our second leadership principle, I don't think you can lead other people well if you haven't got yourself close to that sweet spot.
Absolutely. So that leads to the next part of my question, which is, we know we have to do what excites us, but how do lawyers, particularly early in their career or as they're progressing through their career, how do they find that magic spot, what excites them?
Well, I think it's a function of experimentation, particularly in the younger years. Yes, you are going up that first mountain. You are hell-bent on acquiring and advancing your career and getting runs on the board and so on. But I think there's a risk that if you become too comfortable in one particular zone, that might be at the exclusion of other opportunities. So I encourage people to experiment as much as they can, get as much experience as they can, and don't be shy. Don't feel that you've just got to sort of, if you're a litigator, be stuck in litigation for the rest of your life, sort of stuff. So, experience it. And I've met a number of people who've been in private practice who've decided, no, I don't want to be in private practice anymore. I want to go in-house because I just want to have one client. And so Hayley Evans is an example at the Ministry of Social Development, who's interviewed in the book, of someone who did just that. And I wanted to include an interview in the book with someone who'd actually made the leap from private practice into in-house counsel to show that life in that field can be equally rewarding, if not more so. Yeah.
So there's different career paths and choices as you progress through the ladder.
Many, and indeed there'll be many lawyers out there who'll say, basically, pardon the language, but sod this for a game of soldiers, as they say back in Britain. And they might get out of law altogether or use it as a springboard into other fields, like myself, like getting into consulting. So whether it's a vertical or horizontal gravitation into other fields, but there's opportunity out there for lots of people, and a legal background is very powerful.
Absolutely. Really, really powerful.
Yeah.
I'm not a human resource, I am a human. Great quote that comes out in this book. But what does that actually mean for how you set up a law practice and how law firm leaders take this theory and put it in practice in their firms?
Well, that quote actually is not something that I invented. I actually borrowed that from an article which I credited in the book from the Law Society Journal in New South Wales, I think in 2017. It was a fantastic article, which you can look up. But basically, my point in articulating that was to explain to people that too often the way we lead people is to treat them as resources. They're dispensable, disposable, and we sort of adopt management speak when talking about, the language, human resources itself, I think, is somewhat unhelpful.
In a law firm, they're referred to as fee earners.
Yeah, that's even worse.
Yeah.
And so, at the end of the day, we are dealing with people just like you and I, and younger people in their careers who have aspirations, who have capabilities and skills, and don't want to be regarded as being authors or fee earners or human resources. And so part of the challenge, I think, in this second area of leadership is to treat people as you would like to be treated. And it means putting people at the heart of your decision making, and I'm still gobsmacked by the number of firms who have never carried out any form of internal research to identify the feelings, thoughts, emotions, perspectives of the people who work in their firms. Instead, they just treat them as a fee earner. Here's a desk, off you go, and that's it. And we're not just talking lawyers, we're talking about the support staff as well.
Yes.
who play a vital role in these firms, so whether it's secretaries, PAs, or people in the executive suite, whatever. But they all have something to say, and I think the hallmark of a good leader is to be able to understand what those perspectives are by asking them. It's quite simple. And Sir John Harvey Jones, who influenced me in the early part of my career, who was an industrialist in Britain in the 80s, I remember he once said, good managers insist on the bad news. And I would say that good leaders insist on the bad news too. And it's not all bad. This is the thing. I think people are frightened to ask in case they think, oh, what are they going to say about me? You've got to have broad shoulders. You've got to be able to take it on the chin. But you will find, if the questions are phrased appropriately, that you'll get constructive feedback that's both helpful, supportive, but also will point out shortcomings if they need to be pointed out.
And that's interesting, right? Because we're seeing law firms over the last few years doing really well with getting feedback from their clients, and they're all their clients. So a wide survey pool.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of law firms probably only find out what happens when someone leaves and they do the exit survey, which is always tinged a little bit with kind of someone justifying a decision. Not that you shouldn't do that, but you're saying that you need that kind of wider survey pool while people are actually in the business with meaningful questions to understand, like you would your clients.
Yeah, and this isn't just a one-off, once-a-year exercise. I think, I do know firms that have software that enables them to, on a weekly basis, understand what the happiness index is in the firm.
Wow.
People can actually go and vote. I mean, it was exemplar law in Boston 15 years ago that enabled people, it's a bit like when you're at the airport and you go to the loos and it says, how are the loos today? And you've got 3 buttons to press, excellent, mediocre or bad. And they had a very similar software. They said everyone, before they checked off work in the evening, they just pressed 1 of 3 buttons. How was today? Good, bad, or indifferent? And that way he could just monitor on a daily basis, and if something's not right, what's going on? And really address it. So I think, having your finger on the pulse of the perspectives of your people, I think is one of the initiatives that leaders should really adapt. I think the second thing is to keep reminding your people, why are we doing this? What's the point of all of this? And that's about reassuring them about the purpose of the business, the why, as Simon Sinek has often talked about. Why are we doing this? Is it just to make money for the partners, or is it to serve a wider social purpose? And that's to, in my view, to help people in our communities, people and businesses, get along and get ahead in life. And that's the value that lawyers contribute to our society. So I think reminding them about what that purpose is, and that's a challenge for some firms because they actually haven't defined what their purpose is. They sort of implicitly think they know it, but it's something that it's not taught at law school, let's put it that way. I think another issue here in this area is understanding and defining what productivity means in a firm. And you talk about fee earners, and historically the mindset is purely about billing hours.
How many billable hours you do a day?
Which is destructive on cultures, I think healthy workplace cultures. And we're seeing productivity being redefined by forward-thinking firms and accelerated by COVID and things like the 4-day week, where all of a sudden, post-COVID, you had to work from home. Before COVID, people said, well, we're not doing that. And a lot of people would say it would never work in our firm. Well, working remotely is happening. The job is still getting done, and people are having to adjust to it. But all of a sudden, we're still seeing firms being able to take on board Andrew Barnes, who pioneered the 4-day week at Perpetual Guardian, take on board those initiatives and still have a productive culture. And I think that's a really important one. The last one that I just want to mention, so there are these 4 here. So that was getting perspectives from your people.
Yes.
That is reminding them what the purpose is, redefining what productivity should really mean and what it's all about. And the fourth area that I think is important is professional development. So there's 4 Ps there, if you like.
Yes.
But the thing is that most people, I would imagine, I believe, and who go to work for a law firm, want to grow and develop and learn. And so they should be given those opportunities to do that, not just in terms of a narrow area like CLE or continuing legal education, but let them go on a Tony Robbins course or whatever. Get those skills on presentation skills, business development skills. I'm teaching grandmother to suck eggs, as it were, but those sort of things are absolutely vital to create the rounded professional today. And so it's worth making the investment. As they say, if you think that's expensive, try ignorance.
Beautiful. So we've talked about productivity, outcome focus, the change in law firm adaptation, and we've touched upon the billable wow, which is always fun. And alternative pricing methods have been around and been talked about, and they're going to change the legal landscape for 15, 20, probably even longer. And yet, the billable hour is very, very profitable. So will law firms move away from that model, and what will facilitate that change, and what will it look like?
Yeah, they're already doing so, and they've been moving away from it for the last 20 years. It's just that I think in New Zealand, which tends to be quite a conservative country, it's associated with risk, and a lot of firms who are sitting comfortable making money say, well, why take the risk of changing our pricing model from something that's made us money in the past to something that has uncertainty and risk tied up in it for us. But you know, it's worth, when we have this discussion, as John Cleese once said on 40 Towers, there's enough material here for an entire conference. So to answer your question as briefly as I can, I think it's worth reflecting on your question by going back and looking at the history of some of this, because the billable hour was adopted by US firms in the 60s, 50s and 60s, and all of a sudden, as a result of time and motion studies, it was a very convenient and risk-free way to actually put a price on your labour. Yeah. Over the years, we've seen that being challenged by a number of people, not least the American Bar Association in 2002 did its own investigative paper, which can be downloaded today, and if you read it today, it's just as relevant today as it was back in 2002, which highlighted 15 areas which were basically negative impacts on morale and culture and law firm profitability. You say that it's a profitable method. Yes. In fact, it places a cap on profitability, and some people think that, well, this is the only way that we could actually price our services to maximise our returns. I don't agree. And other firms that have actually made the transition would say that by getting rid of the billable hour, you've taken that cap away of we've only got so many hours, because you're not in the business of selling time. No. You're in the business of delivering value to clients, and clients are prepared to pay for the value if you can demonstrate that you can bring that about. So when I go and see you as a lawyer, I'm not buying your time. I don't care how long it takes you to do the job. I don't care about the task or the complexities involved in it. But if you can get me the outcome and give me that peace of mind, I'm prepared to sit down with you and pay a fee that represents what it's worth to me. Now, if legal professionals are willing to open their minds and change their mindset, which historically is entrenched in the past, and say, how do we actually educate ourselves to scope out a task in advance of us quoting a fee or a price, yes. Then you suddenly find you can open up a world of possibilities. And it also involves ditching timesheets as well, because timesheets, I talked about productivity a few moments ago. Presenteeism is not a measure of productivity. No. And so, in my mind, there'll be people who disagree with me, but to my mind, the focus for all our efforts needs to be on delivering outcomes for our clients, not on recording the amount of time that we're sitting in the firm or the inputs that go yes. into that, but measuring the effectiveness and the outputs. And there's plenty of evidence, empirical evidence, that back this up, the effectiveness and efficacy of this. Not only that, but there are many law firms now that have made the transition. And I know, having spoken with several partners of firms that have gone through this transition, that they were scared shitless, basically, before they made the transition, saying, what are we going to do? And we've had this billing methodology for years, and all of a sudden we're going to start introducing a different way of pricing our services. But they have found it very liberating, and also it is, if anything, enhanced the profitability of the firm. So there's, as I say, there's enough material for an entire conference, but there's plenty of evidence that shows now that firms are realising the shortcomings of the billable hour and realising that there is a better way that better suits them, but also better suits clients as well and helps deliver value.
So you refer to something that Joel Borowski brings up, the law firm club structure.
Yeah.
And it's prevalent in most jurisdictions, particularly here in Australia and stuff, and it has its issues and problems. But how do you start kind of, well, first of all, what is it? And then second of all, how do you actually break that down and change the culture in the firm from that?
Well, I'm referring in the book to an article that Joel Borowski wrote in reference to second-tier firms in Australia. But I think the analogy can be used even further down the ladder, because it basically refers to historically the partnership model and how many firms are run as a bit like a gentleman's club. I use the analogy a bit like a boarding school, that basically you get promoted up through the ranks to prefect, and so that's analogous to a partner, if you like, but that everyone's operating, if you like, as sole practitioners, sharing office space, sharing secretarial support, each with a car parking space, but busy all doing their own things in different directions. And that's effectively like the barristers' chambers model. But there are plenty of law firms who still operate that way. I think Joel Borowski's point, and I'm hoping I'm quoting him accurately both here but also in the book, is that the transition that's taken place and probably needs to take place is that firms need to evolve away from that model to one of a business entity, which is a more unified model, as I alluded to earlier, where all the professionals are working together in pursuit of a common cause. And the implications for that in terms of policies, protocols, procedures are set out in Joel's article. It's interesting, I often do a test with some of my clients and I say, if you look at this continuum, so that over here you've got the barristers' chambers model and over here you've got the corporate model, where do you see yourselves on that continuum and which direction are you moving? Everyone says we're going in this direction, but typically people would say we're around 5, 6 or 7. I think even some of those scores are unrealistic, because in my view I think they're at 2, 3 or 4.
Wow.
So I think still a lot of firms have got a long way to go in order to adopt a more functional structure that's more suited for our times. And that's why the third principle that I talk about is run your firm as a business entity.
Yes.
And I try to explain what that actually means in the book, because a lot of lawyers don't know what a business entity is. I'm sorry, but they don't. And a partnership structure is a form of business entity, but it's not serving them terribly well. How can you make decisions about the operational aspect of a business when a partner thinks that because he or she is a partner, he or she has to have a say in every decision that's made in the functioning of the firm? And that still happens, and it's ludicrous. So you have to be able to devolve responsibility and give authority to executives and let them get on with the job. And that's really hard, because that's a control thing. A lot of control freaks who are sitting around the boardroom table,
absolutely.
and they don't want to let go. They want to say, well, this is my business. Why am I going to trust someone who's not a partner in this business with decisions about it? Well, hello, welcome to 2023, but this is what you have to do. You trust those people to get on. They're professionals in terms of IT or people management or in terms of financial management. Let them get on with the job, and you get on with your job, doing what you do best, and that's advising your clients and helping them get ahead in life.
Brilliant, couldn't agree more with that. So I want to touch a little bit now on about how law firms are governed, the board structure, and a lot's been said over the last few years about diversity, which is obviously massively important.
Yep.
Gender diversity, cultural diversity, we need more of it. There's no reason not to have it, and we absolutely should. But there's kind of a third strand to this as well. When you look at the boards and the governance of most law firms around the place, it's lawyers providing the governance to lawyers. So there's a whole strand missing of executives, technical professionals of a different discipline.
Yeah.
So what needs to change, and how do we address that?
Well, I think New Zealand is hampered in a way because the regulatory framework here prohibits senior executives from being shareholders in the business. So from a board perspective, there's probably a natural tendency to say only shareholders will actually be on the board. Whereas in the UK, as you'll appreciate, of course, it is possible to be a CEO of a law firm and be a partner or director of that firm as well. However, that's not to say that it's not possible and shouldn't be possible for executives to have a seat at the table. And I think most self-respecting firms informally would have their practice manager or general manager sitting at those partners' meetings, but whether they have a vote is a different matter. But I think we are seeing a trend increasingly of what is referred to in the book as executivization in law firms, whereby the power and influence of executives is taking hold at the boardroom table. And again, I think this is a control thing, is that any partnership deed needs to be able to accommodate these people so that they can actually influence decision making at the table, so that we can cater for a wide range of people who are working in those firms.
So we need to change our structures and devolve power and authority within firms, and that other professionals can have more of an influence.
I believe so, yes, very much so. Yeah, and that doesn't come easy to firms that have the historical mindset, but it is happening, and I think market forces will actually make it happen. The more firms actually go down this path, you know how lawyers like to copy other lawyers, even though they're competitors. They'll say, well, what are they doing over there? So, you know, they will mimic them. They will suddenly say, well, if it's worked for them, you know, we may be laggards in all of this, but we might say once it's been tried and tested with another firm, then we'll give it a go. But I would just encourage people to say, look, you know, get up to date with what's happening and understand that governance is a critical aspect to running a legal business effectively. And if you don't know enough about it, you know, get involved with institute directors, start rubbing shoulders with people who've been there and done it, and who can give you that confidence to actually start introducing a type of governance structure that meets everyone's needs, not just those of a narrow band of partners.
Great advice. So in the book you start talking about a leadership charter. So the obvious question to ask is, what is a leadership charter? Why is it different from a partnership agreement? And why do you need one?
Okay, what is it? It is basically, as I say, a charter. It sets out exemplary practices that are expected and encouraged from leaders, legal professionals in a firm. So whether you're a partner, a director, or whether you are in the C-suite leading executive, it basically says these are the behaviours that we expect from you. And I borrowed the concept of the leadership charter from Kouzes and Posner's book, The Leadership Challenge, one of the best books written on leadership, but it was one part that I wanted to extract. So I thought this could be really useful for law firms that seem to rely on just a partnership charter to say, well, you know, that sets out our agreement between us all, as well as certain protocols about voting rights and so on, but it does not address, unlike a leadership charter, certain rules and behaviours that are expected of partners. So it goes much further than a partnership charter. And the 5 areas that I borrowed directly from Kouzes and Posner, and I challenge anyone to disagree with this, and I refer to the 5 here as, firstly, encourage the heart. You know, encourage your people to keep doing good things in the firm all the time, giving them good feedback, enabling others to act. So, you know, give them the tools to do the job well, which includes, you know, professional development and so on. Inspire a shared vision. It comes back to, again, about why are we doing this and where are we, you know, taking our business. And then challenge the process. This is always a good one about you know, challenging the status quo. Why do we do things this way? Historically we may have done it for years, but is that a reason to carry on doing it? So encourage people to say, is there a better way? You know, are we inefficient, or is this system not working for us anymore? And I think that's really good. And lastly, model the way, which is really very much about setting a good example, you know, around the firm, and being a role model for the next generation of people coming through the system. I mean, most law firms have a succession issue, as I've discovered, and there are a number of things tied up in all of that. But as I discovered, quite often, most firms don't have a leaders' charter. They've never even heard of one. So I'm not saying they must have one, but I think it's advantageous to have one, because I think it sets out the ground rules that says, okay, if we really want leadership to take hold in our firm, then we need to hold ourselves accountable around the partnership table, or as amongst the leaders, to behave in certain ways, encourage and support each other to behave in certain ways, and that if we don't, we either support them to do it or we call them out if there's a blatant disregard for those sort of exemplary practices.
And if you sit there as a table of leaders and agree to those principles and agree what it means for your firm, and then all sign to it, you're more likely to follow it and hold each other to account, right?
Correct, absolutely. So it doesn't cost money to do this.
No.
It's just requiring people to say, okay, I get it, I'm prepared to sign up to it. Get your pen out and say, we all, high five, we agree to do this.
And there's a power in that.
Very, very strong power. And particularly if any new partners are coming in, or new CEOs or practice managers into firms saying, at senior levels, at a leadership level in this firm, this is the glue that binds us all. And we expect people to be able to adhere to these practices. And we'll support you to get there if you're not quite there yet. Yeah.
There's an interesting concept you touched upon in that last answer around succession planning. And we know it's an issue in many law firms and many don't do it well. So why is that, and why do people leave it so late?
Short-term thinking, maybe. People cruising along in their 50s and 60s, and it happens. Recently I got a phone call from someone who's ready to stand down but doesn't have a successor lined up. There's no one groomed, and that might be a reflection of his own inability to lead. I don't know what the answer is. But a few years ago I ran a survey in New Zealand, and I think only 13% of those that answered said they'd had any formal succession planning process in place, which is a bit of an indictment, to be honest. And so when we think about the next generation, we all reach a certain age where we don't want to carry on doing what we're doing. Have we got young people ready to pass the baton to?
Yeah.
And if not, then why not? And so I think, it's to every law firm and partner's advantage to basically ensure that there is someone coming up through the ranks, and to give them the capabilities to excel at being leaders in the future. And that makes transfer a hell of a lot easier. Otherwise, they find themselves hanging out their shingle and saying, "Oh, who can I sell my practice to? Who can I, latch on to and have a consulting job for a few years?" But most senior lawyers, would like to get some payback for all their years of effort. So this is another reason why I think it's really good to take a Dennis Lilly run-up, if you like, at this. Yeah. You don't do it the year before you plan to retire. You need to start working on this about 6 years beforehand, and try to identify those people who are going to be likely successors. And that involves not just pinpointing them, because it's not just about a promotion, but it's about asking them and involving them more in the business and seeing if they actually want to step up and be the successor. Yeah. And it's been my experience, particularly lately, where I've been doing quite a lot of work with senior associates, that many of those senior associates are actually working in the dark. Their perceptions of partnership are that it's a promotion and a pay rise, and it's recognition for all their hard work. They have little conception or understanding that it's actually making the transition from employee to employer, and all the risks and responsibilities that involves. And so that's why I think that firms and partners in firms who are looking to develop a succession plan need to unlock the secrets of how their firms run, which involves sharing things like financials, understanding the dynamics involved in running a legal business, the risks, insurance risks, indemnity risks, all the rest of it, and just giving people a test drive. And that might be called salaried partner, if you like, but it gives people the opportunity to say, is this what I want? And you've got to make that attractive. But for a lot of young people coming through, making that kind of decision and working in the dark is crazy.
Absolutely. So climate change, sustainability goals, being part of the community, you talk a lot about this in the book. Mm-hmm. Most of us know it's really important now. Most of us in business recognise a need for it. But yet for law firms, understanding that they want to be part of this, but how do they actually do it? Something that I'm asked quite a lot as well. How do you actually show this and demonstrate it?
Well, there are firms that are actually doing it, and I think they're embedding this very much into their strategies and their thinking in a genuine way, so that it's more than just greenwashing or ticking the box or just create a nice image out there that we're socially conscious, but in fact we're only doing it to cover our backside sort of stuff.
So win some government work, right?
Yeah, exactly. And if they're challenged, or what's your environmental policy? We've adopted sort of a paperless office approach, and whatever it might be. Where do you start? I think you start by just wrapping your head around the issues, and I think the starting place for a lot of firms is to come to terms with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, of which there are 17, and they cover a number of things from gender equality, the environment, good health and well-being. I could go on. Not all of those necessarily apply to a law firm, but they can do. And I think I think change happens when you have conversations. You know, there are so many partners retreats that are going out there talking rubbish half the time, and very little is decided upon or achieved. And I think it's really good to actually provoke people, maybe bringing an outsider who's a specialist in this particular area, to start saying, you know, what are our practices and how could we actually improve that and help contribute to helping solve some of the world's problems. Now there are bodies that do actually help law firms in this way. In Australasia, the Australian Legal Sector Alliance, which has membership, I think, of approaching about 40 firms, mid-sized firms,
Brilliant.
all of whom sign up to certain environmental protocols designed to minimise carbon emissions and so on. And their annual report is fantastic because it shows all the initiatives that firms have actually engaged in. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel or sort of make decisions in the dark. You can see what other firms are doing and learn from, you know, their experiences, which I think is hugely helpful. The other body which I'm aware of, B corporations. There aren't many law firms around the world that have become B corporations, but some are increasingly doing so. B really stands for benefit, but it's basically a group of businesses all around the world who share one common goal, and that's to use their business as a force for good. And again, the B Corporation network has its own protocols. You're independently audited by them to ensure that you get the accreditation, and they'll support you in putting in place and implementing certain policies that will actually accelerate the firm's development in this particular area. So that's what I would encourage firms to do, is to stand back, do your research, have discussion in the firm about, you know, how this might apply to us, and don't try and, you know, chew the whole elephant, or whatever the expression is, in one go. Incrementally introduce it, start making change, because if you try and do too much in one go, nothing will happen. So I think that's the first strand in all of this. That's leadership in the community. I think the second area is giving back, which firms generally are pretty good at. Although I've found that quite often they do it in a very ad hoc way. You know, there'll be a partner who supports Little Johnny's football club, and they might give a bit of money for the shirts or whatever. And I've often discovered that you know, there's a lot of goodwill and a lot of generosity in firms, but it's not coordinated. And one of the firms that I profiled in my book was Robert Camp's former firm, Stephen Scone in Plymouth in the West Country in England. And they really champion both sustainability and also giving back. And they're one of the few firms that I've noticed that do an actual annual report, which summarise things beautifully in terms of this is what we gave to charity, this is how we volunteered, this is the pro bono work we did, and these are the sort of carbon emissions that we saved. And that is more than just influencing government or any clients, but I think it's also the feel-good factor amongst everyone that works in the firm that we are actually a force for good, and we are leading in this area, and we're contributing to helping make the world a better place. And I think if you can do that, then give yourself a pat on the back.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Awesome. So all our regular viewers will know this is the bit where I find it really fun anyway. Well, we ask the same kind of question of all our guests. You've obviously built a business, you've been around this field, you've been a marketing manager of a big law firm, as you alluded to earlier. So for people out there, what's your one tip for marketing or business development that's really helped you through your career?
Can I answer that in two ways?
Yeah.
Because I've worn a number of hats there. I think, so I might give you two answers if that's all right. The first answer relates to if you were a legal professional in your firm, what's the one tip I would share and encourage you to adopt? And that's ask your clients. Because we don't do it often enough. And our clients have a choice in terms of who they select as their advisors. Why do they choose you? What do they expect from you? Are you living up to the service standards that they've come to expect? And quite often it's hit and miss. You know, we do it and we hope that we sort of hit the target by, you know, delivering, you know, our expertise and doing the matter in a way that we think is the appropriate way. But I think it's only when you ask and I've often done this as an intermediary for firms, that you can uncover some really useful things that often bear no relation to your skills or expertise, but it's the experience that we're having. You know, it's like going to the restaurant and say the food was great, but the service was crap.
Yeah.
So that's the one tip I would share with listeners who may be legal professionals in their own firm. In terms of my career as a consultant, I found the best thing to grow my business is writing a book and getting published.
Yeah.
This is book number 4, and it keeps, from my perspective, it keeps me in touch with what my client base and network is thinking and feeling. And it's actually quite a cathartic experience writing a book, but it does take a certain amount of time to decide what goes in the book, what doesn't go in the book, and to articulate certain aspects, hopefully as cogently and as simply as possible. And I hope this latest book adds to the other 3 on that score.
Fantastic. Great advice.
Thanks for having me.
So thank you, Simon. You've been a fabulous guest. That's another one of our business conversations finished. I've learned a great deal. I can't wait to watch this back, and I'm sure you will all want to watch this video many, many times and read this book. I've read it twice already. It's called The Heart of Practice. There'll be a link below in the description where you can buy this book. Make sure you do click on that. And while you're here, like and subscribe to our channel. There's plenty more of these business conversation series coming up, and plenty more I've already done. So make sure you don't miss a single episode. We look forward to seeing you next time.